Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm reviewing the first 27-inch 4K OLED gaming monitor, the Asus ROG Swift PG27UCDM. That's right, smaller, higher density 4K OLED monitors are set to be available in the next few weeks, and today I'm fully testing this hotly anticipated panel format to tell you exactly what it brings. The PG27UCDM uses a 27-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED panel from Samsung Display, who were first to market with a gaming-suitable OLED at this size. There's been a couple of professional-focused 27-inch 4K OLEDs prior to this, but nothing with a high refresh rate, so this new QD-OLED is finally delivering a proper set of specs for gamers with this format. While this new panel is being listed as 4th gen QD OLED, it isn't fundamentally different to the 3rd gen 32-inch 4K 240Hz panels we saw last year, except for its pixel density. This is very much a shrunk down version of those 32-inch panels, bringing with it all the benefits and negatives to QD OLED panels. It's no doubt great to see a higher pixel density because it seems the main OLED manufacturers have struggled a bit to get this type of OLED down to the required pixel size, but you probably shouldn't get your hopes up for widespread improvements to QD OLED technology here. So what does the PG27UCDM offer? Well, this is a very similar design and build to Asus's previous 27-inch OLEDs. The front is dominated by the panel with normal bezels and a chin featuring the Asus logo, behind which is the directional OSD control. On the rear we see the usual central box design which houses all the components, with the thin OLED panel extending outwards from there. This area looks essentially the same as other ROG Swift OLEDs, with different types of plastic in use and a large RGB LED ROG logo. It looks fine and it's well built. The stand is Asus's classic ROG Swift pillar with an elevated 3-pronged leg design. The legs are made of metal, which adds a bit of a premium touch. There's no coloured highlights here and the overall construction is quite sturdy. You also get the silly projected logo thing, which I instantly disabled. The stand supports height, tilt, swivel and pivot adjustment with a decent range of maximum height. There's no active cooling inside this monitor, with Asus continuing to use their passive cooled design. When examining the port selection, we see the first new feature, DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20, which wasn't included with the 32-inch PG32UCDM. This allows for the full 4K 240Hz over DisplayPort without DSC, provided you have a compatible DP 2.1 graphics card. It's also backwards compatible, offering DP 1.4 with DSC, and really, whether you use DP 2.1 or DP 1.4 functionality, you won't notice a difference in image quality. It's a nice to have feature, but DisplayPort bandwidth absolutely was not holding back these 4K OLED panels. In addition, we get two HDMI 2.1 48GB/s ports, a USB-C supporting DP alt mode and 90 watts of power delivery, and a couple of USB ports in a hub that allows for KVM switch functionality. It's a good port selection that offers everything you want now and in the future. The OSD is a typical Asus design with a strong feature set, including all of the usual gaming stuff like crosshairs, timers and shadow boosting, plus a broad range of color and HDR controls. There's a couple of quite useful additions in here, like OLED anti-flicker and proximity sensor controls, which I'll detail more shortly, but in general, this is a fast and easy to navigate interface. One of the best aspects to this new 27-inch 4K QD OLED panel is its pixel density and resulting text quality. We go from 140 ppi with the 32-inch 4K panels to a little over 160 ppi at 27 inches, representing an 18% increase in density. Relative to 27-inch 1440p QD OLEDs, it's a whopping 50% increase, which is very noticeable. Yes, a 4K resolution makes a difference at this panel size, especially with an OLED. The pixel structure is basically identical to what we got with the 32-inch 3rd gen panels, so it's still a triangle RGB layout with green on top, red and blue below, and similar proportions for each of the subpixels. The difference is the subpixel structure has been shrunk to provide 163 ppi. What this does is it practically eliminates the slight text artifacts we see with 32-inch QD OLED panels and gives us identical text clarity to a 27-inch 4K LCD. With those 32-inch 4K QD OLEDs, I thought text clarity was very good, but ultimately found it wasn't quite identical to 32-inch 4K LCDs. 27-inch 4K QD OLED is a step better, and I'm comfortable calling this identical to LCD. I couldn't really see any color fringing around text at all, even at a very close distance with 100% display scaling. This is now a solved problem, and the gains relative to 1440p QD OLED are substantial in terms of how text artifacts are reduced and eliminated. This new panel is fantastic at rendering text. Before getting into the panel composition and coding, a word from today's video sponsor.
The Hardware Unboxed CES coverage is brought to you by Gigabyte and their new range of X870 and Z890 motherboards, powering the latest AMD and Intel processors. Gigabyte Z890 range supports Intel's new Core Ultra processors, while the X870 range supports AMD's Ryzen 9000 series, including the gaming flagship Ryzen 7 9800X3D. All models offer robust power delivery with optimal cooling, screwless M.2 storage, and AI-powered overclocking software to ensure you get the most out of your CPU. The stacked I/O offers various connectivity options, including Wi-Fi 7, up to 10 gigabit LAN, Thunderbolt 4, and plenty of USB ports. Now, a new feature of the AI top models is the included utility that allows you to train your own AI models at home or for small/large-scale businesses. Gigabyte's X870 and Z890 motherboards are available right now from your favorite online retailers, so for more information, please check the links in the video description.
What hasn't been improved, at least as far as I can tell, is the screen coding and panel composition. The way this panel handles reflections and looks a bit grey in brighter environments appears basically the same as with the 32-inch QD OLEDs. Maybe a slight improvement, but generally the same. So the same issues from past reviews remain with the 27-inch 4K variant. In brighter environments where light sources are in front of the display, the panel has a tendency to reflect ambient light, raising blacks to the point where they appear somewhat grey. This impacts one of the key selling points to getting an OLED, which is its deep blacks. They just won't be that rich or deep in brighter conditions, especially relative to, say, glossy WOLED panels. General reflection handling is very decent and even improved compared to those 32-inch models, so mirror-like reflections aren't too bad. Though being a glossy panel, there is always going to be some amount of visible defined reflections, which get worse the brighter the conditions are. However, the issues with the coding can be minimized by optimizing the placement of light sources in the room so that lights are behind the display. The darker the environment, such as gaming in a dim or fully dark room, the better this QD OLED panel looks, and in dim conditions you will typically get a rich, deep OLED black experience. It's really hard to say whether this will be an issue for you, as it can be a case-by-case basis. Personally, I think it's one of the more annoying issues, the larger issues with QD OLED panels, but if you primarily game at night, it's not anywhere near as much of a concern. At the very least, it's something to be aware of. What's also important to be aware of is that OLEDs generally aren't great monitors for desktop usage, productivity apps, and web browsing because they are susceptible to permanent burn-in. It's nice that this 27-inch 4K OLED has great text quality for desktop work, but it's not immune to burn-in. Anything with static content like toolbars, icons on screen for a long period of time, like you get with a lot of desktop apps, it is at risk of burning in. Conversely, dynamic content like gaming or watching videos is at practically no risk of burn-in, so don't worry about this if you're primarily using an OLED for gaming. Even the occasional bit of desktop app usage is fine. It's more 8 hours a day of productivity work that may lead to burn-in, as we've found from our ongoing burn-in series right here on Monitors Unboxed. Asus continue to add OLED care features to their monitors, so now the feature set is quite comprehensive. There are things we've seen before, multiple screensaver settings, pixel shifting, and auto logo detection, but also something new which I think is a very useful inclusion. Asus call it the Neo Proximity Sensor, but basically this is a proximity sensor that detects when you aren't sitting in front of the display and automatically turns the screen black, preventing burn-in. After all, there's no point displaying static content or anything at all when you aren't there to view it. I've seen a lot of features added to monitors over the years, and many are gimmicks. This absolutely isn't a gimmick, and it works super well. In fact, it's quite a clever inclusion, almost like a smart screensaver that only activates based on whether you are in front of the screen or not. It's customizable too, with a few built-in distance options, or the option to calibrate it to the exact distance you sit from your monitor. When the sensor detects you aren't sitting in front of the display, it will turn the screen black after a predetermined amount of time, either 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, and when you sit back in front of the display, it turns back on instantly. The cone of detection is reasonable too, so you don't have to be sitting exactly in the center for this feature to work, but obviously if you view the monitor at quite an extreme angle, the sensor won't detect you. And of course, you don't have to use this feature at all, it's disabled by default. I think this is a neat evolution of burn-in prevention features. Why should the screen remain on if you aren't there? May as well add some smart sensors to automatically switch it off, which is exactly what Asus have done. In addition, you get the usual 3-year burn-in warranty, but I suspect using this feature will make a genuine difference, cutting down on burn-in caused by static content being shown when you aren't physically looking at the display. Of course, This won't make too much difference for heavy productivity users who will sit there and stare at an Excel spreadsheet for 14 hours a day, but every little bit counts. Response time performance is excellent on this 4K QD-OLED monitor as it is for other OLED displays we've tested so far. OLED offers lightning fast response times around the 0.3 millisecond mark at its maximum 240Hz refresh rate, and that leads to fantastic motion clarity. OLEDs also maintain the same performance at all refresh rates, so even when testing at 120Hz or 60Hz, we see similar results in the 0.3 millisecond range. This is a nice benefit for variable refresh rate gamers that results in a single overdrive mode experience. In contrast, many LCDs typically perform worse at lower refresh rates relative to their maximum refresh. On OLED monitors, the main limiting factor is the refresh rate itself. This means that on two OLEDs running at the same refresh rate, you'll get the same level of motion clarity, which is important when comparing across models. For example, if you have a 240Hz 4K QD-OLED running at 120Hz and a 360Hz 1440p QD-OLED running at 120Hz, both will produce the same motion clarity. You'll only see better motion clarity on higher refresh rate OLEDs when gaming at frame rates above 240 FPS, the maximum refresh the PG27UCDM supports. If you don't expect to be playing games above 240 FPS, then there is no practical advantage to a higher refresh rate OLED than this one in terms of motion performance. There is effectively no difference in response time performance between this QD-OLED and other OLED monitors, including WOLED variants. OLEDs are much faster than even the fastest LCDs I've tested, and this is true whether we look at the best performance or average performance across the refresh rate range. Not only are OLEDs fast, they also have no overshoot artifacts, which can be an issue with some LCD models. When viewing cumulative deviation results, we can see that OLEDs get much closer to ideal response time behavior, and in most cases offer performance an order of magnitude better in this metric than LCDs. In practice, this leads to around a 1.5 times advantage in clarity at a given refresh rate. So 240Hz QD-OLEDs like the PG27UCDM offer a similar experience to 360Hz LCDs, speed that isn't currently available from an LCD at this resolution. Like other recent Asus OLEDs, this new model supports eLMB black frame insertion. At a 120Hz signal input, eLMB inserts a black frame in between each real frame, technically running the panel at its maximum 240Hz refresh rate. This improves motion clarity at that refresh rate, making 120Hz with eLMB look similar to 240Hz without eLMB. But it's a very restrictive feature as it only works at 120Hz and requires both adaptive sync and HDR to be disabled, plus the motion clarity benefits are not as large as with backlight strobing on an LCD. It's a nice bonus feature, but not something I'd personally use. OLED anti-flicker is also available on the PG27UCDM. By default, this monitor uses a 48 to 240Hz variable refresh rate range with low frame rate compensation, or LFC, giving us an effective VRR range of 0 to 240Hz. With anti-flicker on middle, this range shrinks to 80 to 240Hz with LFC, while on high it's reduced further to 140 to 240Hz without LFC. When OLEDs flicker, which is rare, it's usually when there are large frame rate fluctuations that push the panel into the sub 60Hz range, so raising the minimum refresh rate can help alleviate obvious flickering. That's what I found with the PG27UCDM using the anti-flicker setting on middle. It reduces, but not eliminates, some instances of flicker in unfavorable scenarios. High disables LFC, so I wouldn't recommend using it, but the medium setting is useful and a good inclusion from Asus. Input latency is excellent, offering a 0.1 millisecond processing delay in both the SDR and HDR modes. Combined with fast response times and a decent refresh rate, this OLED feels very snappy to use, only beaten by the absolute highest refresh rate models on the market. Despite its high resolution, I think it's still a great option for multiplayer gaming because the refresh rate is high and total lag is low. Power consumption is pretty much the same as 27-inch 1440p QD OLEDs like the MSI 271QRX. This means that relative to the 32-inch 4K models, we're seeing about a 33% reduction in power from a panel that is 29% smaller in area. WOLEDs still retain an advantage for white content due to their additional white subpixel, but the difference between the technologies is much smaller in mixed content. Compared to a 27-inch 4K LCD, we're looking at 2 to 3 times the power consumption in a worst-case scenario, so OLED can be a little inefficient compared to LCDs there. All QD-OLEDs that we've tested so far offer a very similar color space. In the case of the PG27UCDM, we're looking at 99.1% DCI-P3 coverage, as well as 97% Adobe RGB coverage, strong results for viewing HDR content or working in those color spaces. In total, I saw 77.5% coverage of Rec 2020, which is slightly lower than some of the other QD-OLEDs I've tested, but still in the ballpark and still great for a gaming monitor. Factory color performance is very good, especially when it comes to grayscale performance. This monitor had a near perfect color temperature and good gamma, leading to a Delta E ITP average just above 5.0. There are the usual concerns around oversaturation, as this display does not use an sRGB gamut clamp out of the box, but when we compare these results to other monitors, the grayscale results are fantastic and color checker results are mid-table. There are multiple ways to enable an sRGB mode on this display, but I found the most accurate was the sRGB Cal mode. This mode is very accurate, with Delta E averages below 2.5 across the board, making this one of the best calibrated monitors that I've tested. The white balance is perfect, gamma is excellent, this sRGB mode is top-notch for SDR use and doesn't require tweaking, which is good because it locks settings. With that said, you can still enable an sRGB mode with fully unlocked settings by changing the display color space setting, which is still quite accurate, just not as accurate as the sRGB Cal mode. Compared to other monitors, the sRGB Cal mode is right up there among the best I've tested, which is a difficult playing field these days as a lot of OLEDs are shipping with excellent calibration. As I said, it's not really worth performing more calibration on this display unless you wanted to use the wide gamut capabilities, because these results are outstanding. I'd just use the sRGB Cal mode or change the display color space. Brightness is another hint that this QD-OLED panel hasn't been updated significantly compared to previous QD-OLEDs. In the SDR mode, peak brightness tops out at 255 nits, which is just slightly better than the next best QD-OLED and in the ballpark of today's WOLED panels. Compared to the PG27UCDM, we're looking at just 4% higher brightness. This level of brightness is still sufficient for most indoor use cases, but obviously it's not as bright as today's LCDs. Also, Asus offer a uniform brightness setting, which is not enabled by default, and caps the monitor to around this 255 nit level for all window sizes, rather than varying brightness as you resize windows, behavior that I find annoying. Minimum brightness is great at 13 nits, giving users a good range of brightness. I was very impressed with the viewing angles of this panel. They are very wide, which makes it easy to view the display even at quite extreme angles. It really looks excellent. This also means that there is a large sweet spot for viewing this QD-OLED, and you won't notice issues like the edges being slightly lower contrast or a bit washed out, which can be an issue with some flat LCD panels, particularly VAs. Uniformity was also very good with my unit, nice and uniform viewing full white and no dirty screen effect viewing dark greys. This is keeping QD-OLED in a leadership position for display uniformity among OLEDs. The Asus PG27UCDM is well suited to HDR from a hardware perspective. OLED panels, including QD-OLED, directly emit light and have individual pixel control, which makes them ideal for displaying HDR content. This feature allows each pixel to independently vary from fully switching off to displaying bright highlights, giving us deep zero-level blacks and per-pixel local dimming. The level of control OLEDs provide minimizes blooming in high-contrast scenarios and allows for clean distinction between bright and dark areas that are close together. Compared to LCDs with a multi-zone backlight, OLEDs have far fewer ugly illumination artifacts, which are most noticeable when displaying difficult scenarios like star fields or subtitles, and there are no zone transitions as bright objects move around the display. With per-pixel control as its main advantage, OLEDs are best at displaying high-contrast scenes with rich shadow detail, which is a key aspect to a good HDR presentation. Darker content interspersed with dazzling bright highlights brings out the best in OLED displays, as does HDR content with fast motion. For gamers especially, input latency on most OLEDs is low in the HDR mode. The weakness to the HDR presentation on an OLED is overall brightness. While peak brightness can be high in the best cases, full screen brightness is low, and this limits the punch in bright daytime scenes. LCDs may not have per pixel control, but zone backlights can simply get significantly brighter in bright scenes. Depending on what you want out of an HDR monitor, your preference could swing more towards LCDs or more towards OLEDs, but typically speaking, OLEDs are a great choice that deliver a fantastic HDR presentation. Now, one of the issues that's cropped up with QD-OLEDs recently relates to their HDR configurations. With these panels, you tend to have to choose between a range of compromises, like having great HDR accuracy but reduced peak brightness, or high peak brightness but panel dimming in bright scenes. I was hoping that a new generation of QD-OLED panels and monitors would resolve this problem, but unfortunately that's not the case. The PG27UCDM has the same sort of QD-OLED configurations that we've seen before. There are a large range of HDR configurations, but I'm going to focus on the three most usable modes. The display HDR 400 True Black mode is the same as what we've seen from that mode on other monitors. It's limited to around 450 nits of brightness, but is very accurate across a wide range of conditions with great EOTF tracking and no panel dimming in brighter scenes. This is the most accurate mode with the least brightness on offer. The console HDR mode with adjustable HDR on is equivalent to peak 1000 modes seen on other QD-OLED monitors. Brightness now reaches 1000 nits in low APL scenes, and EOTF tracking is decent at 2 and 10% window sizes. However, when we test using a reasonably high constant APL, in this case an APL of 50, EOTF tracking shows noticeable panel dimming. This test condition simulates a scene with higher brightness, and we can see brightness is about half of what it should be, a classic issue with these QD-OLED peak 1000 modes. The third option is to remain in the console HDR mode, but also enable dynamic brightness boost. This is a boosted brightness configuration with dynamic behavior, so at times you can see visible brightness shifting as scenes change from low APL to high APL, which can be a little distracting. However, this configuration retains 1000 nits of peak brightness for low APL scenes and improves brightness for high APL scenes to reduce panel dimming. But there are a few catches. EOTF tracking at APL 50 is wonky due to the dynamic behavior that fights to improve brightness at times, and EOTF tracking in darker scenes, tested using a constant APL of 18, is very inaccurate and shows elevated brightness. Essentially, you get better peak brightness and superior accuracy in bright scenes, but the trade-off is performance in dark scenes. None of these modes offer the best experience for HDR content, and it's extremely disappointing these issues persist into 2025 with new monitors. It's still a situation where you have to pick and choose what sort of aspects you want to preference. Do you want better performance in bright scenes or better performance in darker scenes? Really, this sort of premium OLED monitor should have a single HDR configuration that offers great performance in both situations without sacrificing peak brightness. My preference as a general choice, which has been the case for most QD-OLEDs, is the peak 1000 configuration, which on this Asus monitor is the console HDR mode with adjustable brightness, but I have heard varying opinions with others liking the experience in the other two configurations. HDR brightness is identical comparing the PG27UCDM to other QD-OLED monitors. In these charts, other monitors are listed using their brightest configuration that preserves accuracy, and you'll see basically no difference at various window sizes. Right now, the best WOLED panels get around 15% brighter at a 2% window, which is not exactly an earth-shattering difference. And in this chart, we can confirm brightness versus window size performance is the same as the larger 32-inch variant. In real scene brightness, we're not seeing anything different to past QD-OLED panels. QD-OLEDs, especially in some configurations, have great brightness in low APL scenes when needing to display small elements like lightning, street lights, or stars. Mid-APL content is similar to other OLEDs, and then high APL content is where this technology struggles. Generally today, the best WOLED panels get a little brighter on average and don't suffer from panel dimming in brighter scenes, but as of today, there are no 27-inch 4K WOLED panels in direct competition with this QD-OLED. LCD monitors with local dimming are unsurprisingly at the top of the chart. Lastly, we can compare HDR calibration. One of the things the PG27UCDM does really well is grayscale accuracy in the various HDR modes. There's no obvious color tint here, and generally good tracking at a 10% window size. In color match though, it does depend on the mode being used, but the best modes are extremely good relative to other displays. Then for HDR color volume, we see great results in line with other QD-OLED monitors, provided you are using the settings that enable the highest levels of brightness. I should also mention here that the PG27UCDM supports Dolby Vision, and this can be enabled through a toggle in the OSD settings. Right now, this is mostly useful for source devices that aren't a Windows gaming PC because Dolby Vision support sucks on Windows, but if you're watching video content using a media player, Dolby Vision is a useful inclusion, though right now we don't have solid tools to test Dolby Vision performance on monitors like this. Final section of the review is the Hub Essentials checklist, and normally we look at advertising first, but in this case, I've been sent the monitor to test before the product page goes live, so I'm skipping straight to the feature support matrix, which shows strong results. Asus offer a lot of features, including USB-C with power delivery, a KVM switch, DisplayPort 2.1 that enables a DSC-free experience, Dolby Vision, limited backlight strobing, an unlocked sRGB mode, and more. This is also an OLED panel with RGB stripe level text clarity. There's a couple of borderline results here. QD-OLED panels still have issues with HDR EOTF tracking and bright scenes while retaining max brightness, and I found a few instances where brightness wasn't as good as it should be on AMD GPUs, probably related to FreeSync Premium Pro support, which can be fixed using the EDID trick. Also, while anti-flicker is good at reducing OLED flickering in tricky scenes, I can't guarantee this issue is fully resolved just yet. So, that's how the very first 27-inch 4K OLED gaming monitor performs. The Asus ROG Swift OLED PG27UCDM with its 240Hz QD-OLED panel is a great display that delivers the same sort of OLED experience we've come to love at the high end. But it's not exactly a revolutionary step for OLED monitors. This is basically just a shrunk down version of the 32-inch 4K QD-OLEDs we got last year, with few if any fixes for the weaknesses of this technology. That shouldn't take too much away from what is still an excellent monitor. The 32-inch 4K QD-OLED panels from last year delivered an outstanding experience for gaming, with a bucket load of strengths leading me to say that 4K gaming has never looked this good or this clear. The exact same thing can be said for this 27-inch variant, it's just as brilliant. The increased pixel density of 27-inch 4K OLED basically eliminates any lingering artifacts related to the subpixel structure and text rendering, delivering the best text quality I've seen from desktop OLED so far. This is truly equivalent to a 27-inch 4K LCD. Of course, with the panel being smaller than the 32-inch models, it's not quite as immersive for gaming, so I still prefer the 32-inch size, but this 27-inch panel definitely looks super sharp and clear. In addition, we get all the usual benefits of OLED technology. Combining a 240Hz refresh rate with super fast response times leads to elite motion clarity. There's benefits for all types of gamer here because competitive or faster paced games look great at 4K 240Hz, while single player titles also benefit from the combination of a high resolution, fast transition times, and true HDR. Deep blacks, per pixel dimming, bright highlights, and generally good tuning from Asus deliver stunning visuals across the board. What's most impressive about these high-end Asus OLEDs is the sheer amount of features you get in addition to excellent factory calibration, especially in the SDR mode. There's Dolby Vision support day one, there's an OLED anti-flicker feature, there's an unlocked sRGB mode, there's a proximity sensor to turn off the display when you're not in front of it, there's HDMI 2.1 and DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20, there's USB-C and a KVM switch. All of these inclusions are genuinely useful and some are exclusive to this Asus monitor. So what are the downsides? Well, as I mentioned, this is really just a shrunk down version of the 32-inch panel, so the usual QD-OLED flaws are still present here. There's panel dimming in brighter HDR scenes, something that really needs to be addressed so users can get a single HDR mode that offers everything this panel is capable of. There's still issues with the reflectivity of the panel in brighter environments, making blacks look grey. And of course, there's the risk of permanent burn-in that limits this display's usability for desktop apps and productivity, despite its excellent pixel density and 3-year burn-in warranty. Generally though, I think this is an excellent monitor, and with strong performance and a great feature set, it will be difficult to beat as more 27-inch 4K OLEDs are released throughout the year. As for pricing, I actually don't have a final price for this monitor yet, but I believe it will be around the $1,000 US mark, a little cheaper than Asus's 32-inch variants. That sort of price is going to be fine for a high-end monitor with this level of performance. Really, it's difficult to discuss value right now because we need some comparison points. We need more 27-inch 4K OLEDs to see exactly which options are the best and where all the models fit in terms of pricing. Asus are kicking things off strongly, but there's plenty more to come. So anyway, that's it for this review of the Asus ROG Swift PG27UCDM, which basically kicks off our CES coverage for 2025 because this model has been announced around CES time. I think it's being shown at the show. It's being we can test it before the show if you know what I mean. But yeah, this is a CES announcement and you should be able to get it very soon. And we do know of more 4K QD-OLED models at a 27-inch size coming from other brands as well. So you'll see and learn more about those very shortly. Of course, if you do want to support our independent testing here at Monitors Unboxed, the best way to do that is via our Patreon page. If you sign up, you'll gain access to some pretty cool benefits. Not only will you be supporting our testing, but you'll gain access to the ICC profiles and calibrated settings that we create for all of these reviews. We've got our Discord chat, a great place to chat about monitors, get recommendations. I'm in there chatting with you guys on a regular basis. And what else? BTS content, monthly live streams, lots of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.